Welcome, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from DeltaCX.com. We're a full service CX and UX consultancy doing projects, training, consulting, including fractional CX and UX leadership. And welcome to two in a row today, our office hours Ask Me Anything, where today, luckily, I am joined by the always fantastic John N.A. Brown. I do want to remind everybody also that I do still have COVID, and from time to time I am just coughing uncontrollably, but just press that 10-second forward in YouTube button and we'll all be fine. And I want to thank the people who are paying for my streaming software, since I paid for the license yesterday. Thanks to everybody who's giving to the channel through the YouTube memberships program, where I get $3 to $10 per month from all of these fantastic people. And I did eat some chocolate chips today, but I still can't taste them, so I didn't bother having too many of them. So another warning for today, oddly enough, is I have so many questions backed up that I'm not sure we'll be able to take too many of your questions live. The show failed 2 weeks ago when we had a storm and Dr. Nick was here and I could barely get my internet working. I've got questions backed up from then, and then we got a bunch of questions already in today. So that means we better jump right on this and introduce special guest, John N.A. Brown. John, who are you?
Well, I'm John N.A. Brown, not just N.A. John Brown. Let's see, I'm a
Hold on, I've got
with,
something for that.
Thank you very much. Please
Tip your
tip
waiter.
your Debbie Levitt with chocolate chips. I have 7 university degrees in different topics, including 3 PhDs. I've published a few books, a whole bunch of scientific papers. I'm a lecturer. What else? I mostly focus on UX research in Silicon Valley and around the region for the last 6 years, working for companies you've heard of and a few you haven't.
Groovy.
How's that?
Love it. So I'm going to jump right in because we already have too many questions. Some of these were asked of me and Dr. Nick 2 weeks ago, but the show died. And some of these were sent in between over the last 2 weeks. So let's jump on the first one. If you were to be creating an apprenticeship for product or UX in a small software company, what resources would you use to keep costs reasonable and maximize the benefit of training time?
Wow. That question kind of breaks my heart. The first thing I would want to do is make sure that the apprentice is being paid.
Yes.
Just as a side note there, I understand that's not the focus of the question, which is more about keeping costs down and whatnot. But there's so much of this false apprenticeship going on. Right? Apprenticeship comes from the Romance languages. It means to learn. And so the primary thing you want to do is provide someone the opportunity to learn in a way that they can't learn in school or on their own. So I'd want to set up a system where they were able to watch good work being done. They were able to question it constantly. They were able to participate in the work being done and eventually reach the point where they reversed roles with the people around them so that they were taking over the work and having their decisions questioned as opposed to the other way around. If you'll pardon my referring to the old-timey philosophers, if a university is a log with a teacher on one end and a student on the other, then I'd say an apprenticeship is like that log being dug into a canoe, and the teacher and the learner going together down some rapids and taking turns being in charge of the canoe.
I like it. And hi, Milky Drops. Yeah, I mean, what can we add to this? One of the main things to add to what John said, one of the main things I remind people about with the apprenticeship is, of course, you're supposed to be teaching and training and of course, pay them. I see too many programs, both internships and apprenticeships, where they just take somebody, they throw them on a project, and nobody's really looking at their work, nobody's helping, nobody's mentoring, nobody's coaching. Maybe they get a few work reviews, maybe they don't, and then at the end of it, it's like, thanks for doing that project, goodbye. So I think if you're doing it right, that it should be a path to offer people a job to stay there if you've done it right and they're doing a good job. And you have to make sure that someone who is senior or higher, whether that's senior, lead, principal, manager, has time carved out of their weekly calendar specifically to vote to this person. If you have a team of apprentices, you need to devote some time to team meetings and reviews as well as individual ones. So I think one of the key mistakes I see being made is oh yeah, you're an intern or an apprentice here, but we no one really has time to look at your stuff. Just work on your project. So be
Yeah.
careful of that stuff. I do see a question coming in anonymously, and thank you, but I have to warn you, we have like 15 questions already queued up today, and we'll do our best to get to the ones just coming in now. So I will put up the next one. Okay. This was also an old one from a week or two ago, and it says, I'm now planning to move into a more senior role. I know one of the skills senior designers have is mentoring or teaching less senior peers. I only have 3 years of experience, and frankly, I'm not feeling like I can teach or mentor someone very well. Surely I can share my experience, but is it something that will be helpful for people I'm about to mentor? How do I overcome it? Or should I gain more experience first and only teach or mentor once I feel confident about it? Hey, Adair.
Wow. Great question. Um, uh, Gosh, there's a terribly ableist saying from over 100 years ago that is that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And I probably shouldn't be repeating ableist bullshit, but the philosophy intended behind that is a good one. The researcher or designer with 3 years of experience has a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with the person who has none. Um, are you in a position to proclaim yourself able and ready to take on apprentices? I hope not. And I like the modesty involved in the way the question is asked. Um, I think we can all train others. Even the most experienced people can learn from the least experienced people. But if you're going to make a formal job of it and really say that if you spend time with me, it will benefit you in the future in this profession, then you have to have a good knowledge of what you can and can't offer, and you should structure it in a very plain and obvious way. That would be my advice.
I think I would say something similarly. I would say, look, 3 years senior, probably a little premature. I tend to think of senior as 5+ years, and I tend to think of 3 years as mid level, but I know a lot of companies are giving advanced titles as a bargaining chip and not really because it's necessarily worth it. And I think you're feeling that kind of push pull. You're feeling like, I want to be called a senior, I want to be paid like a senior, I want to do senior work, but I'm also not totally ready for some of the things that come with senior because I've only got 3 years. And again, that's just one of the downsides of trying to accelerate some of these titles. So I think that you should just mentor where you can, and where something is beyond you, just be honest about it. I mean, that's what I've always
Here,
done.
here.
If someone asks me to review something, or they want to know why, and it's for some reason an area where you don't have a key strength yet, just admit that. Say, you know what, this is not something I've run into yet in my career, or this is not an area where my strength is. Let's go talk to lead so and so, or let's go talk to our manager, or let's find that other person who knows. Don't make it up, don't guess. Just be honest. People will appreciate that you're being honest.
Here, here. And to add to that, Debbie, because I agree with every single thing you just said. Um, to add to that, when you're confessing your own limitations, do it proudly. Do that as part of the role modeling you're doing for this person that you're training, or for the team you're trying to prepare to work on their own. Because we all have to learn to admit when we don't know things. Otherwise, we're falling into the terrible Dunning-Kruger effect,
Right.
believing that we're great at things we can't do. So, one of the most important skills you can teach someone, mentoring them for professional work, is the admission of their own ignorance, right? Um, yeah, so I would stress that even more than you did, which is vastly more than I did.
And I always think about one of the ways that, I mean, a lot of people know I'm semi obsessed with Disney parks and hotels, not princesses and movies. And they encourage their staff, if someone asks them a question that they don't know the answer to, they encourage their staff to say, I don't know, but I'm going to find the person who does. So, +1 from LinkedIn user. Sorry, your name's not coming up, but thank you for that. So that's totally fine to say, I don't know, but let's find the person who does know. And even if that person is me and John, even if you're coming to a Tuesday office hours and you're saying, we don't know the answer to this one, someone help, or you're coming to our Slack community or Discord, which is free to join. Just go to deltacx.com/links and you're asking your question there. So, I don't know, but let's find the person who does. So there you go.
Single most important skill you can teach someone who wants to learn something new is that there are resources available to them where they can ask these questions and get a reasonable answer. Please remember, everyone watching, listening now and in the future, Google doesn't tell you what's right. It tells you what's popular. And an
Yeah,
awful
same for
lot of
Chat
people who work as
GPT.
consultants will do that. Sorry?
Same for Chat
Thank
GPT. Just because Chat GPT returns it doesn't mean it's good information.
Oh, yes. Yeah, please. Vetting information is really, really important. And learning how to do that appropriately, not so that you get the faster answer, but so that you get the answer that's right. Learning how to vet
Quality.
that is part of professional training, right? That has to be one of the things you teach people.
Yeah.
I've spent decades trying to explain to people that some dictionaries are good and some dictionaries aren't. Some encyclopedia are good and some aren't. Um, as recently as earlier this month, I had to talk with a grad student about the fact that citing Wikipedia for the kind of sources you're citing it for is inappropriate. You can look at Wikipedia and find the sources those people are citing, right? But to actually just cite Wikipedia, it's a frangible resource. It's dangerous to cite that. So that's just one little standard. And all you Wikipedia lovers out there, please know I'm a Wikipedia lover too. I support them financially and encourage you to do the same. But that doesn't make it an academic resource or a professional resource. It's a first step in looking things up.
For Rizzle. Okay, so the next question came in some time ago, and they just sent it in now as the anonymous one, so I promise I have it. It's very, very long. It's going to be too hard to read on the screen. I suggest people take some notes. There's multiple questions in this one, and it's quite complicated. So, yeah, it's a complicated one, but it's an interesting one. So let's take a look. And again, I don't expect anyone to be able to read that. I'm on a 50-inch television and I can't read that, but here we go. This year, I was let go from a volunteering project I enjoyed doing. The PM said I was breaking NDA agreements, but I never shared or published mine or others' work to anyone or on the internet, and it was always password protected. This was a case study I was making. I even asked permission from others if I can use their work, and they said yes. This was a quality UX project because I needed to replace a previous project where it was UI focused only. Did I do something wrong on my end? That's the first set of questions. Then it continues. Actually, let's break it there. There's multiple questions in this long story. So the first one is, this person was let go from a volunteering project. The PM said they were breaking NDA. John, did you catch this story? Do you have a response to it?
I have a response that reflects my own ignorance, given what we've heard so far. If a manager, if a client, if a boss, if someone you're partnered with in any type of relationship feels that you're breaking NDA, then you're in one of those situations where it's good to work from the assumption that they're right, even if you don't think they are. NDAs are weird and complex and terrifying, and they protect people from very important things and for very important reasons. Unless you're quite experienced with NDAs, it's possible that you were violating one without knowing it. I'm not saying you should wear rags for the rest of your life and flail yourself and paint ashes on your face or any of those other biblical things. But trying to argue your way out of that is not a good idea. I would suggest instead that you ask them to help you identify exactly where it went wrong, exactly what you did that was wrong, so that you can not only learn from it, but also make it clear that you are learning from it. Even if they're letting you go, it's good for you to gain the knowledge and the surety that you're doing things correctly. I think that's about it for this stage of the question. I'm not saying you should admit guilt. I'm not saying that you should hate yourself for losing this job. But I am saying when somebody says that to you, assume that they're right. Assume that you missed out on something, that you did something wrong and didn't even realize it.
Yeah, and I think we have some of the information in the story, and I know I don't have the story up on the screen and it's hard to remember, but they said it was always password protected, which means it was on the internet, which means it was available for others to see, which means someone saw it or knew about it, which means you probably did violate the NDA. We talk about portfolios and case studies a lot on this channel, and one thing I say over and over again is that no matter what is going on in your life and career, you cannot violate confidentiality agreements. You just can't. Password protecting stuff doesn't keep you from having violated a confidentiality agreement. Confidentiality agreements and NDAs say, I will not share any of this with anybody in any way for any reason. If you signed that and then you shared it, even in the form of a case study, it doesn't matter if some of your teammates said, sure, you can show my work. The company did not want you to show that work. And what the company says goes. That's who your legal relationship is with. It's not with your fellow UX designer who didn't mind you putting up their work. Doesn't matter. If you want to get permission, it has to come from the company, not from your teammates. So did you do something wrong? Unfortunately, you probably did, but it is a common mistake, and it's why we need to have these conversations on this channel. Just because something was behind a password or encrypted or PDF only or whatever it is, it's confidential. And some of these things that are really quite secretive, I won't even show in an interview. I just have to talk about the project quite generally. And sometimes I can say who it was for, and sometimes I have to be mysterious. But ultimately, that's something key that you need to focus on, which is you promised to keep a secret, and then you didn't. So do you deserve to be let go for that? I don't know. Maybe I would have given you a warning and told you to take it down and threatened you or whatever. But somebody decided that what you did was bad enough that you couldn't be trusted. You breached trust. Okay, let's take a look at the next part of the question. I'll erase the first part and I'll try to put it up on the screen and see if we can read it. Give me a second, I'll make it bigger and I'll read it out loud. David Snodgrass says, I agree, the NDA was violated. Okay, so the rest of this question from the same person says, I also got rejected from a UX design job with no interview offer. Join the club. I asked for feedback, and it was, we are looking for candidates whose experiences align to our goals, such as SAAS technology. Sure. In addition, I also had to do a take-home design challenge for a different company to determine if I qualify for the interview. I still ended up getting rejected. Is the market really that sick for people trying to get into UX? I have done 2 internships, volunteering, an undergrad school project, and getting mentoring. I'm so lost on what to do. I've been on the job hunt for 2 years since leaving school, which is taking a serious toll on mental health. I have no motivation to continue on and look for other opportunities.
I'm really sorry to hear that, and I hope that you can find the motivation in yourself, because that's how life works. Um, you, if you count on circumstances to motivate you to carry on and to be the person you want to be, then you're allowing who you are to be dependent upon others. And believe me, I know what it's like to go 2 years without the job you want. Um, like I said in the introduction, 3 PhDs, um, decades of experience,
I would think
and
you
I've still
qualify
had.
for something.
You would think, but I've still had the same interview experiences that are just mentioned in the question. And I don't mean 20 years ago or 30 or 40 years ago. I had those experiences in the past 2 years. I've been told that I was rejected from consideration without any discussion at all by companies that are looking for senior people, and by companies to whom I have sent links to my massive online portfolio, references to past work, including extremely senior people on both sides of a couple of different oceans. Um, and for one job, they asked me to send some publications, and I sent a couple of really good publications and a copy of two of my books, and I got a form letter rejection. So this is just normal. This is what happens when the hiring process is governed by people who don't understand the job. I was turned down after 4 interviews with one company because two people who would have been junior to me in the job said that I was not detailed enough. So, um, being someone who has never been called not detailed enough, I took that to their boss, with whom I had had several lovely conversations, and said, "Yeah, well, here's my 4-page report on what happened during that meeting." And I understand the outcome was that I was not detailed enough. I imagine this report is probably more detailed from the 2 or 3 lines than the 2 or 3 lines you got from them. All I got from the boss was a pleasant message back. Well, I'm really sorry it didn't work out. So you will be turned down for jobs you're qualified for. You will be turned down by people who don't understand how qualified you are. You will spend years looking for a job, despite the fact that there are dozens or hundreds of jobs out there that people would love to hire you for. And that's because the hiring process is broken. Management is usually done by people who don't understand the work and who aren't allowed to communicate their needs simply and clearly to the recruiters. Instead, everything has to go through a legalese project management filter. The hiring staff end up using checklists that they don't understand. Interviewers inside the company, if you get that far, do committee interviews or individual interviews without any knowledge of how to properly rate someone or compile those ratings into a single score. I actually started writing a series of blog posts about this very issue around a year ago, after a couple of really horrible interviews, and then just got so depressed about it, I set the whole blog series aside. So I've got 11 blog posts on that, and I think I've posted 2 or 3. So believe me, I understand. Don't let that stop you. Find a charity you love and do good work for them. Build a portfolio. If necessary, take the work that you did for this company that you're not allowed to share. Take your memories of it and recreate it as best as you can without any of the branding. And just create a piece that shows the kind of work that you did.
Assuming it
But
was
also,
generic. I just always remind people
yeah, yes,
sometimes they worked on some sort of innovation project that was
yeah,
super high confidentiality. If it, what I've done what John's talking about, where you take something and you strip off the logos and the names and the emails and the branding and the stock photos, and then it just, I did that with a banking website I worked on, and then it looked like it could have been any bank on the planet. And in that case, even though that was technically confidential, once I stripped it away, you really had no idea who it was. But For example, many years ago, and I can say this now because it's like 7 years ago, I worked on a project at Macy's that was highly confidential because they were experimenting with conversational shopping, like talking to Alexa, talking to Google Home. That was highly confidential. Someone had already gotten in trouble for blabbing about it at a conference, and so it was not in my portfolio. It was not something I talked about in interviews. I could not tell anybody anything about it. I waited until many years later because I didn't want anyone to think that I didn't take NDAs and confidentiality seriously. So you can anonymize stuff in your portfolio, only if the stuff looks a little generic to begin with.
Here. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That's vitally important. It's not a game that you play. It's not just something you do for fun or to show creativity. Um, when you're recreating portfolio pieces in order to preserve anonymity, you have to preserve anonymity. I'm afraid I can't read any of these comments that are coming up. To
I'm
me, it's like
sorry.
the word balloon next to Woodstock in the Peanuts comic strip.
I'll read them out. Janice was saying not detailed enough, mind blown. Kayleen was saying it's another red hoodie day. Yes, I've been wearing this all week because I'm sick and I just want to wear an oversized, giant, warm red hoodie. But Solomon said it's a really good looking hoodie, and I got it for being a keynote speaker at a conference in Frankfurt in 2019. So we're just having a side
Nice.
hoodie conversation. But what I would say to the person who asked the anonymous question is I don't want to see anything affect your mental health. That's the bottom line. And if you're at the point where this is something you don't want to deal with anymore or can't deal with anymore, then you might have to press pause. You have to put your mental health first. If there is another job that you previously came from that you're qualified to do, try to get back into that. Is it your dream? Maybe not. Is UX your dream? I don't know. Maybe you think you have to follow through on UX because you did school and you paid money and you spent time, and it's that sunk cost fallacy. I don't know what your dream is. I don't know what's burning in your heart or soul for work. But I know that when it's a down economy like this, you have to prioritize working and making money for your livelihood, for your mental health. And if that means going back to being an accountant or a bartender or whatever you were, maybe that's what you do for a little while until the crap of the economy blows over. You also have to remember that even though you have your 2 internships and all that stuff, it sounds like you're still looking for your first UX job at that junior level. Well, unfortunately, you and 600,000 other people. Everybody who did a boot camp, everybody who did a degree, everybody who did Google's UX course now thinks that they are ready for that junior job. Some are, some aren't. And unfortunately, you're up against all those people. And so the odds aren't good. I can't tell you, oh, if you just try for 2 more months, you're gonna get that job. I have no idea. I can't get anybody a job, and I don't see things getting better just yet. I see them getting worse before they get better. I think we're in for an ugly here, and I don't want to see this affect your mental health. And I think the next decisions you make should put your mental health first, whatever that means, even if it means putting UX on hold. I'm not saying you're bad at it. I'm not saying you'll never work in it. I'm saying put positive mental health first, whatever that looks like. Faye says, find opportunities from other jobs, come up with projects from the problem you see there. If you can.
Yep.
Kayleen
Here,
says,
here.
beat the race to the bottom of junior tech jobs by volunteering for free. And you can still volunteer. It doesn't guarantee that you will get a job. Unfortunately, even we've seen that in some cases, volunteering is not the direct path to the UX job, only because of the flood of people all competing for 10 and a half junior jobs. So I don't have good news, but I do want to see you put your mental health first.
And if I might, Debbie, that is good news. The good news that you've just provided for our anonymous questioner is that the serious issue that was described in the question isn't the lack of a job. That's serious. But the serious issue is the desperation that's creeping into their life. And the solution for that is exactly what you said. Look elsewhere, right? It doesn't mean you give up. It doesn't mean you'll never do this again. In between working for a giant search engine company that you all know by name and a huge and horrible social network that you all curse under your breath, in between those
Forever.
two things, I took a stint as a bartender because I couldn't get work and I needed to work for my own mental health. I couldn't get a job as a bartender at first, so I started off mopping kitchens and bathrooms and hallways in a restaurant and got promoted up to bartender. Is that the job I hope to do for the rest of my life? Oh, goodness, no. No, none of my PhDs are in mopping. Though, if you ask some of my professors, they might say they were. Um,
Shoveling.
shoveling instead. Different idiot stick altogether. Actually, I've done more than my share of shoveling as well. But nothing makes me feel quite as good about my own abilities as working a job that meets somebody else's demands to the best of my ability. That just lifts me out of the doldrums. It's as good as going to the gym. It's as good as reading a wonderful book. And in some ways, it's better than either of those because it reminds me I'm employable. It reminds me that there's nothing intrinsically about me that will stop people from hiring me.
I
So
dig it.
please
And
look elsewhere. Please
I
be
was just going to
happy.
say, I'm
Find,
right in the
find.
same bucket with everybody else. My last contract ended in the first week of July. I'm still looking for a job. I get rejected without an interview every day. And you just have to say, oh, well, that wasn't the right job for me. Next. Keep trying.
Yeah,
So,
yep. My
that's all
take
you
on
can
it
do.
is if they reject you without understanding why they're rejecting you, then that's not a company you want to work for. If their selection process is so bad that they're not even trying to recruit the right people in a meaningful way, then why would you want to work there?
Right. As Solomon said, it's unfortunate, and it doesn't mean that you lack the skills, knowledge, or experience to do the work. It's very much a numbers game. And I know that even when I'm applying, and I think I'm pretty good at some stuff, there's someone who's better than I am, or there's someone who's worse than I am, or as someone said to me privately the other day, maybe they see how much experience you have and they assume they can't afford you. And I say, well, that's unfortunate that they're not even asking. So
Yeah.
yeah. So look, we all run into this. It's unfortunate, but good luck. Keep us posted. Even if it's not UX, we support you, and you're still part of the community.
Yeah, and come back and get guidance and get support from the community, please. Regardless of which job you're doing, regardless of what else is going on, come back and be part of a group where you're being supported and you're supporting others.
Thank you. Well said. Okay, next question looks like this. Can you give some examples of what would be good UX requirements to expect from a product owner at the beginning of an improvement/optimization project? I read this
Wow,
and I caught
that's
on fire, so, I'm.
well, please you take it then, and when the fire abates, I'll step in.
Well, thank you. Um, so my answer to this, it might be the unpopular answer, but my answer is I hate requirements. I don't want to get requirements. I don't want to be told what to make. I want to be told about problems, pain points, questions. I want to find and solve problems. I don't want a list of requirements. Now, sure, sometimes I have to get requirements that say, don't forget, as per the laws of the state of New Mexico, this also has to be in Spanish. But outside of that, outside of legal or regulatory or domain based things, I hate requirements. I don't want them. So I think my question to the anonymous asker would be, what requirements do you need to do your job well? If you are more of an order taker personality, then the requirements you're going to want will be, oh, Thank you, Kayleen. Kayleen says, red looks really good on you, Deb. It's like you're always on fire. Yeah, the problem is if I wear green in front of the green screen, it's the Harry Potter cloak of invisibility thing. But thank you. Yeah, we pulled this one out of a storage bag and threw it in the wash, and now it's really cuddly. Yeah, so it's up to you. If you like to take orders, if you like to be told what to do, if you like to have guardrails and bowling alley bumpers, then you want somebody to tell you kind of what we're making here. And you want to know as much as possible about what we're making. What's this feature? Why are we making it? What does it look like? How does it work? Maybe that's the information you want. I want the opposite of that. I want the problem statement. We've got another anonymous question. Karen, I see your anonymous question. We have like 6 questions ahead of you, so I think John and I might run a little late today. We'll do our best to get to you. We got the dump from Solomon. I think he asked 5 questions. So, David says, from the PO, give me the business needs, operational constraints, goals, problem, etc. Or if this is a user problem, where did this come from? How do we quantify? Yeah, so that's a good point, too. Maybe you don't want to hear exactly what this is or what you're making. Thanks, Karen. Good to see you twice today. Maybe you're just asking about more context around the project, the business goals, the user goals, how we're going to measure success, what are our KPIs, constraints. Yeah, I think David's got a good point there. John, anything to add?
Just agreement with everything that's been said. If you don't define the way that the answer will be used, then you don't know which questions to ask. So you have to know what kind of action the company is prepared to take. You have to know what kind of work the company wants you to do. My preference, like yours, Debbie, is always to go in and discover these things. I've developed a technique for doing this that I've been teaching people for years, and it's actually the topic of one of the books I'm working on now, where just like when I used to work in civil aviation safety intelligence, investigating plane crashes, plane and helicopter and other aviation crashes, I map hazards. I don't map solutions. If you ask me to do a heuristic evaluation, or if you ask me to do some other assessment of a website or an interface, whether it's in a car or on a e-commerce platform, if you ask me to do that, what I do is I go through and I map out the places that are potential hazards, the places where things could go wrong. And then I have a system that allows me to weigh them and prioritize them in terms of their frequency and the depth of the effect they're going to have. And in that way, I can build up a good map for you of the work that should be done to make this interface work better for the audience you have targeted, or for the audience you actually have, depending on which way you want to focus. Anyhow, when I get pulled into a project, it's usually because the team has failed to do the project on their own. Sometimes for months, sometimes for years. And when I get pulled in, if they start off by telling me all the things they want me to do, this is a red flag. If you have been failing to solve this problem yourself, maybe it's because you're focusing in the wrong place. Maybe because the bowling bumpers, as Debbie described them, are leading you to the wrong side of the pins. Right? If the bowling bumpers steer you off the lane, then they're not the right bowling bumpers to be using. It's better to take them off. Anyhow, blah, 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 blah.
Anyhow, so I'm going to ask us to go a little bit faster for the upcoming questions, just because we've got a bunch of them. This is not the Solomon list of questions yet. We have one more and then a bunch from Solomon, who is here today to hear them all. So this one came in, I think, anonymously, and it said, hello. Is it better to have some generative qualitative research without being able to recruit properly, or have no qualitative research and make some concepts directly and test them with user testing, in which will be allowed better recruitment? Wow, I have so many questions there. John, you want to grab this one first?
Oh, no, you go ahead, please. I want to hear your questions.
Okay, so obviously my first question is, Why are we allowed to recruit for testing, but we're not allowed to recruit for generative research? Somebody has created an artificial obstacle or blocker there that we need to get past, and you might need managerial help if you have a half-decent manager. Number two, why are these my only two choices? Why is it, can I do generative qualitative research recruiting the wrong people, which is possibly flawed or invalid research? So why? Why is that my choice? I don't get it. Why are we allowed to recruit the right people for testing, but we're not allowed to recruit the right people for the qualitative generative? Why don't you do a giant round of recruiting and get candidates and participants for both? Like, hey, wow, we sent out that screener survey. We got 300 responses. I need to interview 30 of them, and then I need 20 of them later for usability testing. And then, by the way, the 30 is not the same as the 20, 50 total. It just as an example. So I think this is an artificial barrier that you've been given. I absolutely want to see you doing the generative qualitative research, but I want to see that recruited correctly. And if your company can recruit for usability testing correctly, then it's a lie that they can't recruit for the generative correctly. It should include some current customers, but definitely more target customers, and the same for the usability. Some companies think, oh, usability is easier to recruit for because we're just going to get our current customers. No, you don't want too many of them because they're familiar with the tool. They're biased. They have knowledge. They're savvy. You want the people who fit into this target audience and could be using something like this, but aren't. Hi, Darren. By the way, it looks like Darren just published my podcast on his show, so check out The World of UX.
Hey.
So these are my concerns. That's my lightning round. Over to you.
Okay, I agree. I think the foundational issue with this question is exactly what you raised, Debbie. There are constraints being put in place here as though they are factual or science-based constraints, and they aren't. So somebody has created these constraints, and I would want to know why. Probably, my assumption would be, and I don't like making assumptions when dealing with clients, but not having the whole background here, my assumption would be that somebody has told someone else something that is a constraint, and that has been passed on to you second or third hand. So maybe the recruiters have said we can only do this, or whoever's in charge of the recruiters or liaised with them has said this is the area they recruit in. Whatever it is, none of it matters. None of it matters. What matters, and this is why we should have apprenticeships, what matters is that you have to meet scientific standards to do scientific work. So the basic points that Debbie was just making are vital. Don't recruit the wrong way. Don't interview the wrong way. Don't examine or collect data the wrong way. Don't do any of that. If you are told that you have to do the research in a way that your innate training tells you is wrong, then you can't do that research. I mean, you can if you want the paycheck, but you will not get good numbers out of it, right? And I know this is something I harp on every time I'm here, but badly conducted research doesn't get red circles around it marked by the great teacher in the sky. The people who receive the data from you, the process data, the outcomes, the findings from you, are unaware that it's wrong. And one of your jobs as a researcher, exactly, they hopefully trust you. So when you're turning in nonsense research, they are going to act on it. And if you are following the trends of most of our industry these days, that's okay, because you'll only be at that company for 2 years, and then you'll use your connections to move to another company so that you can get an artificial promotion and job title change. And by the time the company is being negatively impacted by the work that you've done, you're already gone, right? It's a horrible, vicious cycle that downgrades the value of UX as a field and causes some of the arguments that are going on about our profession. Anyhow, I could go on for hours. You've asked me to rush. I will stop. But please, don't do bad research. And if you have to do bad research in order to be paid, then tell them you set bad conditions, and as a result, this is bad data.
Yep, I'm with you there. Okay, here's the first of the Solomon questions, and I do think some of them can get short answers. No offense to Solomon. So let's jump into the first one and try super lightning round. If I can
Okay.
communicate something in 10 minutes when I'm allotted 30 minutes to do so, is there a valid argument for using the entire 30 minutes? I ask because this is a means by which some large companies evaluate candidates for designer roles. They are apt to disqualify candidates that do not utilize the full length of time allotted for case study presentations. I was once told I wasn't a good fit for a design role because I completed a case study presentation in less time than was allotted. The company in question allotted an hour. Solomon.
Okay. Yeah, common problem, hilarious artificial constraints that are nonsensical. In the real world, if you can present the solution in less time, then you should, as in answering lightning round questions. In artificial environments where they're testing you for nonsense because they've been told to test you for something and timing is one thing they can measure and they can't measure accurately the quality of your response, the thing to do is to define that ahead of time. So you can say to them, I have two answers prepared for you. I can speak for 10 minutes and answer all of your questions, or I can present this well crafted presentation that will take precisely the 59 minutes that you would like me to take. Which of these would you like to see? Both are prepared. I can do either one. Ideally, is you present not two separate presentations, but a 59-minute presentation that either starts or ends with a summary is your 5 or 10 minute presentation. So that way, the people who choose the longer one still get the benefit of the condensed version, and vice versa. Um, but yeah, you have to show that you can time manage, and sometimes that means managing the people who are trying to manage the examination. Right? You can do it. You got that, Solomon.
And the only thing I would add to that would be that I would probably be trying to determine that when they first give me the assignment or request. I would probably, if they say, hey, we're going to give you an hour and we want to have your case study. And I would say, okay, how many case studies are you hoping to see? And if I take less than an hour, does that work against me? Because once in a while I have a job interview and they think if I don't fill the hour, I've done something wrong. So can I just ask you up front if you prefer to see that hour filled or if you prefer to see efficiency of time usage?
Lovely. Nicely phrased, too.
Try that. Next Solomon question, which I think we can answer in lightning style. Do you think we were all happier when we only had flip phones?
I think we were all happier when we had tin cans with strings running between them.
I think that's your answer. I think we imagine we were happier in the past. And usually we weren't because I think if you go back to whenever flip phones were, it comes with other crap you're not going to want to have gone back to.
Yeah, here. In terms of actual time travel, I agree with you. But psychologically, the smartphone has created an environment in which everyone is constantly on edge. That's why you have to keep checking your phone. That's why you have to keep doom scrolling when you're on your phone. That constant state of agitation is entirely 100% due to the interfaces on the phones that have become ubiquitous now and part of everyone's life. And if you are between the ages of 16 and 25, you are more likely to die because of distraction from your phone than any other cause. So we know that it's related to loss of sleep. We know that it's related to horrible stress levels in everyone who has a phone. We know that it's related directly to death. So yeah, let's get rid of smartphones and the whole world will be a better place. Leave them for the folks who are in surgery or on a space shuttle and need to have rich multimedia communication with immediacy. The rest of us can slow down.
And I have been using a lot more and more what Samsung used to call focus modes, and now I think it's called just modes. And so basically, usually after my show, I usually have a call after the show. After that call is over, sometimes I'm messaging a few of you, and then I turn on the focus mode. That's no LinkedIn, no Slack, no email. basically very little. My phone gets very stripped down to the things that I find relaxing. I'll watch some YouTube. That's pretty much it. And so I think if we did more of that type of thing, it could help us as well. All right. So next Solomon question from the collection of Solomon questions, and then we'll finish with Karen's question. She's very patient today. Solomon asks, do you think being on camera adds value to remote meetings? If so, do you think being off camera signals an act of defiance? Do you think remote collaborative meetings suffer if all participants are off cam? Love, Solomon.
Thank you, Solomon. Yes, no, yes, and yes. Maybe that was too lightning. It is easier for humans to communicate if visual communication is possible. We communicate by smell, we communicate by touch, we communicate visually, and we communicate through listening carefully and listening accidentally. Visual communication is hugely important. If you can have cameras on during a meeting, the communication will be much, much richer. But some people can't have cameras on during communication. So yeah, there's no hard and fast rule about what's better or what's worse. You've given too few options in your question and created a couple of straw man arguments that I don't really think are worth answering. But fundamentally, to answer your basic question, visual communication helps people who don't know each other and helps people who do know each other all communicate better.
And I have a unique answer to this only because I used to think like, hey, video calls are about recreating that in-person space as much as possible. And so I want to see people and I want to be seen and I'll even put on a bra. I'll make an effort. And then I worked for a South African company and almost nobody turned on their camera because the bandwidth in South Africa is so poor. And so we had to turn off our cameras in every meeting. They couldn't send the video. They couldn't receive my video. So I spent months working for this company. And even when I spoke to some of the biggest banks in South Africa, they couldn't turn on their cameras. And it gave me a really different perspective because I no longer had this American or whatever you want to call it, #privilege view of like, oh, everybody get your freaking face on a camera. Also, we have to remember for diversity, equity, and inclusion, there are people who don't want to appear on camera. They might have anxiety. They might have autism. They might have something else where they just don't like the camera. They don't like to look into the camera. People say, oh, you don't make good eye contact. Who cares? Who really cares? So I think that it's a little bit of #privilege. I don't see it as an act of defiance. If somebody wants to have cameras off, that's fine. And I think we've even done a couple of interviews where someone's bandwidth is so bad we turned off their camera. And there you go. Joel says, South Africa has fiber now, but electricity cuts may lead to a similar situation. Yeah, South Africa has fiber, but not everybody working does. And this was pandemic, so people were working from home. Not everybody working from home had a good internet connection, and the solution for that was we're still going to have a call. We're not turning on our cameras. So
yeah, which is grand, and that's the problem with straw man arguments, where you say if somebody doesn't have their camera on, it means defiance. No, you can have your camera off for a whole myriad of reasons, many of which you've just listed, Debbie, and I agree with those. But I have also worked in companies where it was a question of privilege. Some people could have their cameras off, and others were expected to have their cameras on, and you would be called out for it. And that's creating more of these artificial boundaries to communication. It's more complex than just if you have your camera off, you're being mean. If you have your camera on, then it reflects the ability to do so. There's a lot more to it than that, a lot more depth, because we're humans and we're complicated.
Agree. Next Solomon question.
I'm sorry, I just want to say one last thing on this. I wish we could move the conversation from you don't have to have your camera on because somebody in the meeting might say you don't make good enough eye contact, I wish we could move it from that to who in this meeting is going to challenge anyone else's eye contact? Who do you think you are that you could criticize someone for their willingness to be on camera or their willingness to participate in a conversation? Because if you think you can do that, then you're creating a bad atmosphere amongst your coworkers. So I would put the focus more that way.
Yeah, it's definitely not DEI friendly. Okay, we've got two Solomon questions, and then we've got Karen, and then we're out of here. Solomon
All right.
says, do you think there exists a difference in competency or skill between someone with 6 years of experience versus someone with 7? If so, how much of a difference? Is there a threshold by which a significant difference, if any, starts presenting itself? 9 versus 10? Solomon.
Solomon, it's different from human to human across humans, across fields, across years of experience, but mostly across humans. We've all known the person who goes into their first language class and speaks fluently within a week. We've all known the kid who learns mathematics for the first time and just gets algorithms. Um, People have different skills and abilities. Some folks in their first year in a field are doing work that will eventually win them the Nobel Prize. Other folks who were unable to do that in their first year win the Nobel Prize for work that they did after 40 years. Quantifying qualitative skills is an extremely complex process, and it's not something you can generalize across people like that.
Yeah, and I would totally agree. Could 6 and 7 years be different? Depends what your job is that year. Maybe you happen to have a really great mentor. And I mean, think about me. I've been doing this for 4,000 years, and then I met Larry Marine, and he starts teaching me his techniques. I grow by leaps in 1 year because I just happen to have a new great mentor and person in my life. Otherwise, it's not that it was any particular number. It's not like, year 27 to 28 sure is the one. I just happen to have a really excellent experience in that case. So don't get too hung up on these numbers. It's just not about it. And final Solomon question, which says, does the knowledge and skill of a traditional UX practitioner suffice to solve problems regardless of the domain? Or should one, in the context of, say, fintech, strive to become a financial experience designer? Do you think it's only evident when there's a unique interaction model? For example, if you were building the next generation of bipedal personal robot assistants, you'd hire specifically for voice interface designers to design the robot's voice interaction feedback patterns. Solomon.
Wow. I think you could design specific, or you could hire specific voice interaction designers. But I think you'd be losing a lot if you did. Because if you are trying to do the next generation of anything, you want to get people to understand the depth of the potential of the field, not people who understand the day-to-day workings of the status quo. I hope that's not too quick an answer.
Yeah, I think that ultimately it's up to the company. There are some companies who say, look, we don't want to hire anybody if they don't have 3 years of bipedal robot or they don't have 5 years of conversational design. I get that. They want that specialist, and that's the standard that they've created. Or, as David's pointing out, sometimes these things are learnable. You can go in as a highly talented and experienced UX person. Like when I did the conversational thing at Macy's, I'd never done conversational before. I didn't know if I'd be good at it. And they gave me a shot, and I gave it a shot. And we all learned. And so I think it really depends on what the company's standards are, because there are some companies who might want that fresh perspective and they don't mind you getting up to domain speed, and there are going to be some companies who say, no, this is our minimum standard, and if you don't know fintech, web3, blockchain, bipedal robots, and VR, we're not interested.
Yeah, and that's their call because they're the ones hiring. But yeah, if you have a fundamental understanding of the human cerebral and neurological systems, then you have an understanding of interaction that prepares you to be a better designer of how people should interact with anything in any modality. If you are lacking an understanding of how the brain does multiprocessing in different sensory systems, then no matter how much experience you have in programming human like bipedal robots, they're not going to be behaving like humans. They're going to be behaving like human bipedal robots generation 3 or generation 23. Right? Knowledge of humans is the underlying factor that should inform all interaction design.
Super. And now finally we get to Karen's question, and I have to apologize to Karen for misgendering him. Karen is from Armenia, I think he said, where it is a male name. And so I apologize. I might have used a female pronoun for you. But of course, most of you, I don't know your pronouns. So if I do misgender anybody, please know it's not on purpose, and I'm happy to be corrected. Please always correct me. I will do my best to remember whose pronouns are what. But if I get it wrong, please know it is not on purpose. Okay, Karen says, how do you come up with good insight? And by the way, I don't want the lightning version of this. Karen deserves the long version for waiting. How do you come up with good insights rather than just summarizing qualitative findings? Is there a method?
Bravo. What an excellent question, Karen. Yeah, if all you're doing is summarizing findings, then you're not providing insights at all, right? This is one of the things that's largely misunderstood in our field as it's practiced these days. And it's an argument I've had at a number of really big name companies, and a lesser argument at a few smaller companies as well. The point of collecting data isn't to then turn the data over to someone. The reason that you hire people who know how to do this is so that they can interpret the data for you. This is why when you look at formally conducted research, there's a difference between the findings they report and the conclusions they draw. Right? You have to be able to interpret the data to find something out. If you ask me about the weather today, we need to define which aspect of the weather you want me to tell you about. Because I could say it's great and mean it's sunny out, and you could be thinking, is there enough shade? So we have to define these terms. Oh, look at that. There's the weather now. Gee, never anticipated that, Debbie. The point is, I'm talking too much as it is. All I was trying to say is when, no, I think that's enough. I'll stop there. Is that enough? Say so.
Well, let me see. Let me put it back up. Let's take another look at it. So, yeah, so this is where people say, what's the difference between findings and insights? And Kayleen is also pointing out, I can hear Dr. Ari in my head saying point of view. So we've got the finding. The way that I tend to describe it is the findings are the things that you saw and heard. I saw people do this. I heard people say this. Then the insights are some of the conclusions and some of the aggregations of these things. Hey, we saw 6 people do this. We saw a number of people express this. We saw frustration from various people around this area. It looks like this is a pain point, an area to focus on. This is something, now remember, you're kind of moving up from tactical to strategic. Hey, strategically, this is something that you need to know and need to pay attention to. Then you have what Dr. Ari calls the point of view and what I call actionable suggestions. Now you can say, hey, look, here are some insights. Here is that broader thing. Here's a list of pain points or key things that we believe or saw, not just believe, but saw and heard. Now, what do we do about that? This is where you get to have a perspective as a researcher and say, okay, because we saw these things and because we saw these patterns and because we synthesized and saw whatever this was, here's some suggestions we have. Now, it doesn't have to be a wireframe, and it doesn't have to be an exact solution. It can even be, sometimes we've written very bland suggestions to clients. Like, for example, we know that this particular page is out of scope for our project, but a number of people hit this page and they had a mountain of problems on this page, and we suggest very strongly that this page not be ignored and not be descoped, and that a fresh look and some more research around it be undertaken. That's maybe not the most actionable advice, but we are telling people a perspective, a point of view. We have an opinion. We think something should be done. We're telling you what that is. And sometimes our advice is a lot more specific. We saw this over and over again. People kept having problems over here. We suggest that you consider doing something relatively like this, though we're not claiming this is the ultimate solution.
May I speak to that, Debbie?
Please, please.
Okay, so I would go a little bit deeper. Coming back to this idea of needing to understand how the human mind works. Your interface with the real world, and it's an interface between the processors where your mind seems to sit and the real world around. And what you do is you perceive and then you interpret them. The things that you perceive are like the data that someone can collect. The interpretation of those things that you perceive create the map of the world around you that you're interacting with and inform you about what you should or shouldn't do next. And that's what a researcher does. A researcher is supposed to not only say, I can collect these streams of data and compile them, I can also rebuild them into an image that will help you better understand your product, your users, the intersection between the two, the field that you're in, the demands of the real world as opposed to the theoretical structure in which your engineers are working, all of these things. So part of the job of a UX researcher or researcher slash designer or designer slash researcher is to say, we can collect information that may or may not be more detailed than the information your company currently has. We can collect it in ways that allow us to reconstruct it into something that represents a different perspective than the perspective of the people in the boardroom. And hopefully it's a perspective that reflects the actual needs and demands and joys and hatreds of the users. But this need to capture information and then interpret the information into something actionable is a bit more complex than just saying findings and interpretations. Okay, and I think it's vital that people understand that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we've got a follow-up from Faye that I want to throw in. And Faye says, to add to this question, can you deliver insights when your initial research goal isn't set or clear?
Can you? Yes, but you will not be necessarily delivering the insights that someone is hoping for, or not necessarily specific insights. You won't necessarily be addressing the issues they are hoping you will address. But if we go back to this notion of the human interacting through the body interface with the world around, what you've just described as a problem is what we do all the time. Walk down a new street and you have to interpret data and create a mental map of the street and your time in it and your place in it and compare that to the outcomes you're hoping for. Well, I was hoping I could reach Elm Street if I went down this street. I was hoping there would be a corner store here, right? Or whatever. You take in data and you adapt your understanding of the world around you according to your interpretation of that data. So can you do that? Yes. Will it help you address the specific issues that a client or your boss are hoping you will address? Not necessarily. That's a crapshoot. But can you do that? Yes, that's what people do all the time.
And what I would add to that is I would put up this graphic about the way that I sum up the phases of a good research process. And we start with, what do we want to learn? And the planning and the goals and the strategy. If we have not correctly defined this research project up front, and we aren't totally sure of our goals, or they're unclear, or we didn't agree on them, or we're not too sure, or we just said, let's just go ask people a few questions, then you could be setting up the rest of the research for trouble, because you might find out later you didn't answer the questions people needed answered, or you needed answered, or your designers needed answered, because you didn't stop and say, wait, we need a clear research goal. Because I can't really write the right questions or the right tasks if I don't have the goal. Everything goes back to the goal. The goal is our shining North Star that says, did we do this research well? Did we satisfy this goal and answer the questions? So looking at this, knowing that what you want to learn and that goal happen early in the process, you run the risk that all the other stuff might not be done correctly or as well as it could have been, and you could end up with flawed research, you could end up with invalid research, you could end up with half research. So I would say, if you can see early on that there is no goal, or it's not clear, or people aren't agreeing on it, or there's too many goals, stop and manage that situation so that you can have one or a few clear goals to guide you through all of this. And Faye is asking, do you have a video on how to get a stakeholder to share their goal when they are unsure? And my question is, why are they making the goal? We want to hear what a stakeholder needs. We want to hear what a stakeholder wants. If you are the researcher, I would say you are writing the goals, because the stakeholder might have shitty goals, bad goals, wrong goals, customer peripheral goals. So talk to the stakeholder, learn what they're looking to learn, and then you write the best version of that. And Ralitza says, I think what Faye means is what to do when you're doing generative research, which has a broad context. I don't know if she means that, Ralitza. I think she means that she's being manipulated by a stakeholder.
If I could jump in here.
Please.
Just to be clear, stakeholders are stakeholders for reasons, and they want to have authority over the process. But I agree with you 100%, Debbie. They shouldn't be setting goals. They should be setting the factors that go into forming the goals. And then you, as a knowledgeable person, interpret that. And it goes back to this idea of rebuilding sensory constructs, right? Translating data into something that's meaningful. So if they're saying, well, we need to up subscriptions on our platform, right? If that's the goal that they're saying, that's very vague. What numbers do they have? What numbers do they want to have? Where do they feel it's falling short? Do they not know where it's falling short? Which people are bouncing and not subscribing? Which ones are subscribing all the time? Those are the kind of questions then that become short-term goals and stepping stones along the path of research, where you have to get some of those things answered before you can build your goals. And I want to divert back to the earlier part of the question for just a moment. I hope everybody on the call has heard of Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman is an Israeli psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in economics more than a decade ago. And he won the Nobel Prize in economics for the work he did with Amos Tversky. And if you don't know their collaboration, you should look into it. They wrote really funny, well-informed, provided great insights. It's where the idea of thinking fast and slow comes from. That's the title of the book that came out of Kahneman's award-winning work. It's also where they get things, people use the term type 1 and type 2 thinking. But Kahneman, in that book, describes the fact that we delude ourselves in talking about heuristics. And I think this is really important for the UX field. As humans, we naturally assume that the answer we find important is the one that's right. And as humans, we naturally assume that the thing that is easiest for us to do is the right one. And I mean to do cognitively. So if you've got a bunch of biases already in place, you're going to assume that that's the right way to go. And you're not just going to assume it blindly in a way that other people can see through. You're going to have a whole structured argument in your head that you can use to defend the really bad decisions you're going to make, that will defend really bad decisions that you've made in the past, and that will defend choices that you will continue to make in the future. You have to be able to see through that yourself, so that you can walk people, so that you can walk yourself through your own biases, and so that you can walk other people through theirs. I strongly recommend you read that work. It's very entertainingly written.
And I've thought about it, and I do have something for Faye and for everybody. And I would say check out the show we did yesterday. Who was there yesterday? That would absolutely help Faye. So, Faye, check out in the YouTube playlists. We've got the Think Out Loud playlist. Yesterday was episode 32 of Think Out Loud. I'm doing a new style of Think Out Loud where we're going into a Miro board and we're doing a Delta CX impact map, which is my variation of an impact map, because an impact map is business focused and I've redone it to be user focused while looking at the impacts to the business. We fill that out first, even though, of course, on our show we're guessing and we're making it up, but you would be doing it for real with your stakeholder. Then I show you another Miro board, and this is where we collect the unanswered questions. So we don't have to have the stakeholder say, what is the research goal? You can collect from the stakeholder, what do they wish they knew? What do they think they know? What kind of information would help them make better decisions? Go to your designer. What kind of information would help them design? Get all of that on the second board that we do. And by the way, all of these boards are available at cxcc.to/Miro. But if you watch episode 32 of Think Out Loud, you're going to see how we use them. And then the third board is really for what happens after the research. So don't worry about that. You need the first two boards right now. That's going to help you do it with your stakeholder and other people on your team, and look at what's going on for the customer. How is that affecting the business, so that we have good business reasons to make that change for the customer and make that improvement, because it'll make an improvement for the business too. And then do the second board that I show, where we collect everybody's unanswered questions. And from that, you'll be able to plan your research and come up with your goals.
Lovely. Lovely. If I could, I'd just like to emphasize that when you're collecting that information from the stakeholders, try to collect it in a way that leaves them the flexibility to change their minds. Don't let them become fragile and adamant about the things that they are saying, because their opinions should be changing as they learn more. A few years ago, I was called in to help with the data analysis for a client who had two very different goals. One was to get more subscribers to their website, and the other one was to make things easier for the people who had already subscribed. But the average numbers they were looking at for the visitors they were getting day by day and the actions taken by those visitors were really confusing. Until I said to the engineer we were working with, just show me the data on a chart. Show me the visitors on the different days and what they're doing. And building a confluence chart showing those things, just a nice XY diagram. We could see that there were completely different audiences, not a single audience. And the problem was that they were generalizing the data. They were doing mean behavior and mean visit lengths. And as soon as you looked, you could see, oh, well, twice a week after you send out your recruitment emails, you get a huge influx of visitors who've never been here before, and they behave differently than the folks who are here every day. So let's grab these as two separate data pools and interpret them separately. And all of a sudden now, you've got the audience who come in not knowing what to do versus the audience who come in knowing exactly what they're going to do. The folks who spend a long time looking for how to do things versus the folks who come in and do the same thing every week. Separating the data wasn't something they had thought of doing. They hadn't conceived of it because they were so used to looking at generalized data. All right, so that's the job of the UX person, is to say, hey, you know what? I bet this problem is richer than you think it is. And you might know what your goals are, but it might be that your goals could be better informed by a better look at the actual data.
I like it. Yes. Yeah. So we're overtime. John, thank you so much for staying late for these fun adventures we have here on the Tuesday show. I'm here every Tuesday. John's here every month, every other month. I think we haven't totally figured out our cadence, but we always love having you here. Any last suggestions or tips you want to give everybody, or where can they find you and connect with you?
Please look for me on LinkedIn. It's the only social media I use, even though it has degraded strongly into a Facebook type environment. It is what I'm using these days. If you look around, you might be able to find my website. Good luck. Um, and anyone who's here, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me through other channels. I'm always happy to chat and always happy to support people when they're going, especially when they're going through issues that seem uh, to be real obstacles in their careers or in their lives. Um, the only other thing I want to say, and I thank you for the opportunity to say this, Debbie. Well, the only two other things I want to say. First, a message to the entire audience: be nice to each other. Um, in this show, we've heard from a lot of people who are struggling intellectually with problems, but we've also heard from a lot of people who are struggling emotionally with problems. And we all have a fragility that makes us human, and we all have a great capacity for kindness. And if we're kind to each other, the whole world gets better. The problems are easier to overcome, both the emotional ones and the intellectual ones. So please, if you're the kind of person who cares enough to attend a podcast like this or a live stream like this, then you are probably the kind of person who can really make a difference by being kind to strangers. Probably you already do. But please let me reinforce that behavior. Be kind to each other. Last comment, Debbie, congratulations.
Thank you.
Not at all. Really, I look forward to seeing the happy couple in person and raising a glass with you together. But for now, virtually at least, let me say congratulations to you both and all of my best wishes for a long and happy future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That is super sweet. And for those of you wondering why is he saying that to me, some of you know, some of you don't know, I got married about a week ago. And so that's why he is saying that. And he's very sweet to say that and give me the sign language applause. Thank you. So I'm going to play us out of here because I have another phone call in about 5 minutes. But thanks for another great show. Thanks to everybody who sent in all the questions. Thanks for your patience. Some of you sent in the questions on January 10th. So I apologize that some of you had a longer wait than even Karen. But we'll try to get back on track next week. Looks like my internet held out today, so that's great. Ralitza says, have a great evening. Malika says, thank you both for your kind and wise words. Well, thanks to all of you. So, yeah, everybody be well. And if you're sick like me, rest up and get better. And we'll see all of you very soon. Thanks. Bye. Customer centricity as business intelligence. Visit deltacx.com to learn why we are